So if you look at the Russia-Ukraine war right now, several different things are happening which are making it go seriously wrong for Vladimir Putin. Indeed, somewhere in the English Channel this weekend, Royal Marine Commandos fast-roped onto the deck of an oil tanker in the middle of the night. 6 hours later, the ship was under British control. Its cargo? Russian oil. Its purpose? Keep Putin's war machine funded while evading every sanction the West has thrown at it. Now, this was the first time Britain has ever done this alone. And most people will perhaps just read this as a naval story, a one-off intercept, an interesting headline. But it isn't. It's so much more. It's actually a thread, and when you pull it, what unravels is a picture of a Russian war campaign that is running out of road simultaneously on 3 different fronts. At sea, on the battlefield, and inside Russia. And the convergence of all these 3 right now, at this exact moment, is something that I don't think is being considered together enough. So that's what I want to do in this video, taking a look at the growing pressure occurring on Putin's dark fleet, the biggest setbacks within Russia's economy, but also how what we thought was Russia's single biggest asset on the battlefield is also beginning to unravel.
This is the Global Gambit.
How you going, everyone? Welcome to the channel where we're returning to the war in Ukraine and to some seriously bad news for Vladimir Putin, which of course means it's extremely good news for everybody else. Now, what's actually happened in the past few hours is that a ship called the Smirtos on Sunday was claimed by British Royal Marine Commandos and specially trained law enforcement officers who boarded it in a 6-hour military operation supported by various ships and aircraft. The British Defence confirmed it was the first time British forces had acted alone to intercept a Shadow Fleet vessel, and the first such operation ever conducted in the British Channel. Now, to understand why this matters, you need to understand what the Shadow Fleet actually is, because Russia has done an incredibly good job of making it sound like some kind of Western propaganda term that doesn't really exist, but it is very real. It's a collection of over 700 vessels, mostly old, decrepit, deliberately obscured in terms of ownership, that Russia uses to move sanctioned oil around the world. Without this fleet, Russian oil doesn't get to markets, and without Russian oil getting to market, the Kremlin doesn't generate revenue for the war. The Shadow Fleet is not a footnote to Russia's economy. It is arguably one of the primary, if not the primary artery keeping it alive. Now, Britain alone has sanctioned more than 500 of these vessels, more than 70% of them over 15 years old. These are not sophisticated covert assets. They are aging tankers with shell company ownership structures sailing through some of the world's busiest shipping lanes. And until this weekend, they were doing so largely unimpeded. But what's changed? Well, earlier this year, Prime Minister Starmer authorised British armed forces and law enforcement to board Shadow Fleet vessels in accordance with international maritime law. As I mentioned in the intro, France has been doing this a few times, intercepting 4 suspected ships since September. This weekend's operation was done in close coordination with Paris, who has a very good set of experience. But what we are watching quietly, therefore, is the formation of a enforced Western maritime posture against Russia's single biggest economic lifeline. Put another way, the Europeans are finally stepping up. And if you're a regular on this channel, you'll know that I am hard or critical of Europe, but because I want the best for this continent. And it's time for us to stop doing the talking and actually step up through action. And this is a primary example of where we're seeing that shift made. And it's a very positive step, especially to take down the tyrant warmonger that is Vladimir Putin. Indeed, there is one detail worth dwelling on. A former British Armed Forces minister said that Britain had previously held back from boarding these ships, partly because, and this is a direct quote, we had a Russian frigate in the Channel protecting some of those ships coming through. Russia was basically running naval escorts for its Shadow Fleet through British waters. The fact that Britain has now moved regardless tells you something that where the military calculus has changed. It's shifted hugely. Putin's investment envoy called it a desperate act of piracy. The Russian Foreign Ministry has also added that the Shadow Fleet doesn't exist, but the same government that runs nearly 700 ships to secretly move sanctioned oil around the world would probably not want you to know about those ships officially existing. So it doesn't really seem to be surprising they will say that. But this all leads to an even bigger thing, which is getting worse, not just for the Foreign Ministry, but for the Ministry of Defence. You see, here's where the tanker story connects to something much bigger. The Shadow Fleet isn't being dismantled in isolation. It's being dismantled simultaneously to Russia's ability to sustain its war on every other front that is currently deteriorating. The situation around Crimea looking incredibly volatile for Moscow. Alternatively, take recruitment. Russia is currently offering signing bonuses of around $80,000, debt relief of $140,000, billboards across the country, social media campaigns targeting more and more young men, multi-million ruble incentives plastered on every available surface. And military recruitment is still, though, despite all these things, down 20% in the first quarter of this year compared to the previous. That's down, despite quadrupling the financial incentives. So think about what that tells you. Russia is in its fifth year of this war, longer than its war against Nazi Germany, and it has already sent tens of thousands of former prisoners to the front line. It has recruited 3 separate waves of North Korean soldiers, and is now offering to wipe out debts to men who sign up. But it cannot fill its ranks. Some people have put it simply that rubles don't fight wars. Nearly 500,000 Russian soldiers have been killed, according to Western intelligence estimates, and hundreds of thousands more have left the country or been maimed and injured. The resulting labour shortage is now bleeding into the civilian economy, and factories can't find workers, wages can't be driven up, inflation is being made higher. Simply put, Russia is experiencing one, if not the most severe labour shortage in its history, certainly from the studies I've done and from people I've spoken to. And the state cannot dictate the birth rate. As a demographer, I can tell you that it is impossible to incentivize people to just have children. Japan has been doing this for years, and Korea cannot do it. Many parts of the former Soviet Union are struggling with declining birth rates, and including Russia, well, they're not going to win that, especially when half of them are in wartime footing. Moreover, the defense sector is already operating at maximum capacity. Factories running around the clock, which means that Russia cannot increase military output any further. The ceiling has been reached, and demand is not going down, especially in dacha season, in the prime time of summer, when people want to be enjoying the Russian weather. Meanwhile, Ukraine is moving in the opposite direction. In May, Ukraine achieved a net territorial gain of nearly 100 square kilometers, the second consecutive month in which Russian forces experienced a net loss. Now, in the grandest scheme of things, it's not going to mean the war is completely changed by tomorrow, but what it does demonstrate is Ukraine's growing offensive and assertion. Ukraine drone operators, according to the commander-in-chief, have killed or wounded more Russian soldiers in May than Russia could recruit to replace them. So for the first time in this war, Ukraine has captured a Russian position using only drones and robots. No manpower, no infantry, and therefore 0 human casualties on the Ukrainian side. Ukraine has also conducted more than 22,000 unmanned ground missions in just the first 3 months of this year. Russia sends more bodies, Ukraine sends more machines. The trajectory of those two curves tells you everything about where this war is heading, and that simply even Russia's greater manpower is no longer making such a difference. And then, of course, you have to follow the money, because all of this is happening against the economic backdrop, which is quietly becoming catastrophic. I made a video in February about the cannibalization of the Russian economy, and we're seeing that even more. Food prices are up more than 18% compared to 2 years ago. Sales tax has been hiked by 2%. Ukrainian strikes on Russian infrastructure have caused gasoline shortages in some areas and persistent airport delays. Consumer confidence is dead, if not completely declining, and business closures are only accelerating. It doesn't matter on the size of the business or the type. So many closures. Some economists already call this a sustained recession. Meanwhile, Russia's military personnel and recruitment costs alone now account for an estimated 9.5% of the total federal budget. 10% of your budget is going towards recruitment costs, not just the overall war. And that's before you factor in hidden spending, the capital costs pushed onto, say, Russian banks, the regional government subsidies, the debt relief programs that have all been announced in the past weeks. The real figure, therefore, when you account for all of it, is likely closer to the double digits, far above 15, even 20%, some people perhaps suggest. And so here's the trap Russia is now locked into. It cannot cut military spending because the military economy has become so large that cutting it would trigger an economic collapse. The jobs, the salaries, the bonuses, they are all now load-bearing pillars, the foundations of the entire Russian economy. Remove them, and the whole structure implodes. But it is also impossible to keep spending at this rate indefinitely, because the revenue side of this equation is being systematically dismantled. Ukraine striking the oil terminals, the West seizing the shadow fleet tankers, sanctions tightening around the grips of the Russian markets and where they're able to sell it to. We've seen a layoff of purchases from India and China, two of the biggest buyers. You cannot spend your way through a war when someone is simultaneously cutting off your income. But that is now the position Putin is in. And so if we role play, pulling back and looking at this week as the Kremlin, it's a pretty terrible one and only going to get worse. Britain has seized one of our shadow fleet tankers in the Channel. This is the first kind of operation that Britain has done, and part of this growing Western maritime enforcement and assertion in a harder line type of foreign policy. Russian recruitment, when we try to find soldiers to fight our war, is falling despite record financial incentives. The labour market is in a historic and perpetual downward spiral. The defence industry hitting its production ceiling and losing more and more of our soldiers than we can replace. Meanwhile, our opposition, our opponent in Ukraine, is gaining more and more territory that has taken us years to secure, fighting with the machines that Russia cannot seem to find an answer or counter, and innovating faster than Russia can do so. And then couple it all together, the thing that is meant to sustain this war. Our economy, the Russian economy, caught in an entrapment designed for itself, too dependent on military spending to cut, but too broke to sustain it. None of this means that us as Vladimir Putin is going to end this war tomorrow. We cannot. We are too embedded, but also too obsessed with this idea that it is our right. Russia has shown a capacity to absorb punishment that has surprised almost everyone. But the direction of every single one of these trends is the same. And the idea that Putin can simply outlast Ukraine or find a way to force Russia to win, well, the strategy Putin has been banking on is becoming more and more impossible to defend. The Dnipropetrovsk is sitting off the southern coast of England right now, going nowhere. That oil is not going to be doing anything, and certainly going nowhere is a good metaphor by which to look at how this war in Russia is going. That's it from me, everyone. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do give it a like. It's free, but does support the channel. And of course, if you enjoy commentary on the war in Ukraine, on geopolitics, but with in-depth analysis from someone who's been to the front lines, who's been in the fields, walked the halls, then you're in the right place. So subscribe as well. Now watch this video here to understand what Ben Hodges thinks about the future of the war.